The blood on her dress had dried to a rust-brown stain by the time Faith Owens stumbled into the narrow canyon, her lungs burning with each ragged breath as the shouts of men echoed somewhere behind her in the unforgiving Texas landscape of 1878. She pressed herself against the weathered sandstone wall, feeling the rough surface scrape through the torn fabric of her sleeve, and listened for the sound of hoofbeats that would mean her death. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the canyon rim above, but here in the shadows she shivered despite the heat, her body finally giving in to the terror that had kept her running for 3 days straight. She had witnessed something she should never have seen. The bank manager in Fort Davis, a portly man named Silas Crane, who always smiled too wide and spoke too soft, had been meeting with a group of men in the back room of the saloon, where Faith worked serving drinks and cleaning tables. She had only gone to the back door to empty a bucket of dirty water, but through the gap in the poorly hung door she had seen the maps spread across the table, heard Crane's voice as he pointed to locations marked in red ink. Land deeds, he had said. Forgeries that would strip a dozen ranching families of their property, all to be sold to a railroad company that would pay handsomely for the right-of-way through the valley. Faith had frozen, her hands gripping the bucket handle so tightly her knuckles went white. She should have walked away. She should have pretended she had seen and heard nothing. But her own family had lost their small farm to such schemes 5 years ago, back in Missouri, before she and her father had come west seeking a fresh start. The memory of her mother's tears as they packed what little they could carry had burned in her chest, and before she could stop herself, she had gasped aloud. The conversation inside had stopped. Footsteps had moved toward the door. Faith had dropped the bucket and run. That had been 3 days ago. Her father, dead from fever 2 winters past, could not help her now. She had no family, no friends close enough to risk their lives for her. The men who worked for Crane had hunted her through the streets of Fort Davis, forcing her to flee into the desert with nothing but the clothes on her back and a small canteen of water she had grabbed from the saloon kitchen. The water was gone now. Her throat felt like sandpaper, and her lips were cracked and bleeding. The canyon was a maze of twisted passages carved by ancient waters through the red and gold stone. Faith pushed deeper into its cool shadows, her torn skirt catching on the scrub brush that somehow found purchase in the rocky soil. She could hear water somewhere, the faint trickle that spoke of a spring or seep, and she followed the sound with single-minded desperation. Her vision swam, black spots dancing at the edges, but she forced herself forward 1 step at a time. She found the water pooled in a natural basin where the canyon wall curved inward, creating a sheltered alcove barely visible from the main passage. Faith fell to her knees and cupped the clear liquid in her shaking hands, drinking deeply despite knowing she should sip slowly. The water was cool and sweet, and she felt it revive something in her that had been dying. She splashed some on her face and neck, washing away the dust and grime, and then collapsed against the rock wall, her body finally giving out. She must have slept, because when she opened her eyes again the light had changed, the shadows grown longer and deeper. Something had woken her. A sound that did not belong to the wind or the occasional lizard skittering across stone. Faith held her breath and listened, her heart beginning to pound again with renewed fear. Hoofbeats, slow and steady, echoing off the canyon walls. She scrambled back into the alcove, pressing herself as far into the shadows as she could manage, and watched the narrow entrance to her hiding place with wide eyes. The horse appeared first, a big sorrel gelding with a white blaze down its face, picking its way carefully over the uneven ground. The rider sat easy in the saddle, A tall man with a dark hat pulled low over his eyes and a duster coat that hung past his knees despite the heat. Faith's hand found a rock, something she could use as a weapon if she had to, though she knew it would do little good. She waited, every muscle tense as the rider drew closer to her alcove. Perhaps he would pass by. Perhaps he would not notice the small gap in the rock where she hid. The horse stopped directly in front of her hiding place. The rider swung down from the saddle with an easy grace, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. He was young, Faith realized with surprise, probably not much older than her own 22 years. His face was lean and weathered by sun and wind, with dark stubble shadowing his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her attention when he pushed his hat back slightly. They were a striking blue-gray, the color of storm clouds, and they were looking directly at her hiding place. "You can come out," he said, his voice low and calm. "I am not going to hurt you." Faith pressed herself harder against the rock, her fingers tightening on her makeshift weapon. "Go away." "Cannot do that." He crouched down, making himself less threatening, and pulled a canteen from his saddle. "My name is Wade Ryland. I have been tracking you for the better part of a day now. Those men back in Fort Davis are still looking for you, but they are searching the wrong canyons. You are safe for the moment." "Safe?" Faith's laugh came out harsh and broken. "There is no safe. Not while Silas Crane wants me dead." Wade's expression darkened at the name. "Crane." "I thought his stink might be involved in this. What did you see?" "Why should I tell you anything? You could be one of his men. If I were one of his men, you would already be dead or dragged back to Fort Davis." Wade set the canteen down on a flat rock within her reach. "I have been watching Crane for weeks. I know he is dirty, I just have not been able to prove it." "Who are you?" Faith asked, not moving from her hiding place. "A cowboy with too much curiosity and a stubborn streak." Wade smiled slightly, a brief flash of warmth that transformed his serious face. "My family owns a ranch about 20 miles north of Fort Davis. 3 months ago, Crane tried to buy us out. When my father refused, suddenly we had rustlers hitting our herds, fences cut, water holes poisoned. Nothing we could prove came from him, but we knew." Faith studied him, looking for signs of deception. She had gotten good at reading men working in the saloon. Wade Ryland met her eyes steadily, no nervous gestures or false bravado. Finally, she reached out and took the canteen, drinking slowly this time. The water helped clear her head. "He has forged land deeds," she said quietly. "Crane and his men, they plan to steal a dozen properties and sell them to the railroad. I heard them talking about it. I saw the maps." Wade's jaw tightened. "That matches what I suspected. Do you remember which properties?" "Some of them." "The McCarthy Ranch, the Swenson Homestead, a few others." Faith closed her eyes, trying to recall the details. There was a timeline. They wanted everything complete before the railroad representatives arrived next month. McCarthy and Swenson. Wade whistled low. "Those are big spreads." "Crane is getting bold." He stood and offered his hand. "Come on out of there. We need to get you somewhere safer than this. Those men will expand their search eventually." Faith hesitated, every instinct screaming at her to trust no one, but what choice did she have? She could not survive in the desert alone much longer. Slowly, she reached out and took his hand, letting him help her out of the alcove. His grip was warm and calloused, the hand of a man who worked hard for his living. Standing in the full light, Faith was aware of how terrible she must look. Her dark blonde hair had come loose from its pins and hung in tangles around her face. Her dress was torn and filthy, the bloodstain from where she had cut her arm scrambling over rocks standing out darkly. She was shoeless, having lost her boots somewhere in her flight, and her feet were cut and bruised. Wade's eyes took in her condition, and something that looked like anger flashed across his face. Not anger at her, she realized, but at the men who had driven her to this state. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I think so." "Good. We are heading to my family's ranch. It is called the Double R. My father and brothers will help protect you until we can figure out how to expose Crane." Faith wanted to protest, to say she could not bring her trouble to his family, but the words died in her throat. She was so tired, so scared, and the idea of not being alone anymore was almost too much to bear. She nodded, not trusting her voice. Wade helped her up into the saddle, then swung up behind her. His arms came around her to hold the reins, creating a protective circle that made Faith feel safer than she had in days. The horse started forward at a steady walk, picking its way back through the canyon. "How did you find me?" Faith asked as they rode. "Luck, mostly. I was out checking our southern line when I saw Crane's men searching the canyons. I have been keeping tabs on them since the trouble started. When I saw how desperate they seemed, I figured they were looking for something important, or someone." His voice was close to her ear, warm breath stirring her hair. "I followed their trail backward and found signs of someone running, small footprints. You did a good job covering your tracks for someone not used to this country. My father taught me some. He used to take me hunting back in Missouri." "Missouri, long way from home. This is home now, or it was." Faith felt tears prick her eyes. "I had a job, a place to sleep above the saloon. It was not much, but it was mine. Now Crane has taken even that from me." Wade's arms tightened slightly around her. "We will get it back. I promise you that." They rode in silence for a while, climbing out of the canyon system and into the open desert as the sun began to set. The sky turned spectacular shades of orange and purple, the kind of sunset that only happened in the vast Texas landscape. Faith leaned back slightly against Wade's chest, too exhausted to maintain proper distance, and felt his solid warmth at her back. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, partly to stay awake and partly because she wanted to know more about this man who had appeared when she needed help most desperately. "The Double R has been in my family since my grandfather claimed the land back in '53. We run about 3,000 head of cattle, mostly longhorns but some good breeding stock from back east. My father, Walter Ryland, runs the operation with my two younger brothers, Wayne and Willis. My mother died when Willis was born, so it has been just us men for the past 15 years. That must have been hard." "It was. But we managed." Wade paused. "The ranch is a good place. Hard work but honest. We treat our hands fair and run clean operations. That is why Crane wants us out. We will not play his corrupt games." The ranch appeared as darkness fell, a cluster of buildings marked by warm lamplight spilling from windows. Wade guided the horse toward the main house, a sturdy structure of adobe and timber that spoke of permanence and care. Before they reached it, men emerged from the barn carrying rifles. "It is me," Wade called out. "I brought someone who needs help." An older man stepped forward, tall and broad-shouldered with silver streaking his dark hair. His face was weathered and strong, with the same blue-gray eyes as Wade. This had to be Walter Ryland. He lowered his rifle as he took in Faith's condition. "What happened?" She witnessed something Crane does not want known. "His men have been hunting her." Wade dismounted and lifted Faith down gently. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, and he steadied her with a hand on her arm. "She needs food, rest, and medical attention." Walter nodded once, decisive. "Bring her inside. Wayne, post guards. If Crane's men followed them here, I want to know about it." The next hours passed in a blur for Faith. Wade's father and brothers treated her with rough kindness, asking no questions as they provided hot water for washing, clean clothes that had belonged to their mother, and a meal of beef stew and fresh bread that was the best thing Faith had ever tasted. A ranch hand who had served as a medic during the war cleaned and bandaged her cuts, tusking over the condition of her feet. Through it all, Wade stayed nearby, a quiet presence that made Faith feel protected. She caught him watching her several times with an expression she could not quite read. Concern, certainly. But there was something else there too, a warmth that made her pulse quicken despite her exhaustion. Finally, Walter sent her to bed in a small room that must have belonged to his late wife. The bed was soft, the quilts clean and smelling of lavender, and Faith sank into it with a sigh of relief. She was asleep within moments. She woke screaming in the darkness, trapped in a nightmare where Crane's men had found her and were dragging her back to Fort Davis. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, and for a moment she fought, blind with terror. "Faith, Faith, it is me. You are safe." Wade's voice cut through the panic, and she focused on his face in the dim light of a lamp he must have lit. He was sitting on the edge of her bed, still fully dressed, his hair mussed as though he had been sleeping in a chair nearby. "You are safe at the Double R. No one is going to hurt you here." Faith's breath came in harsh gasps as the nightmare released its grip. Without thinking, she threw her arms around Wade's neck and held on tight, needing the solid reality of him to chase away the lingering fear. He went still for a heartbeat, then his arms came around her, holding her close. "I am sorry," she whispered into his shoulder. "I am sorry for bringing this trouble to your family. Hush now. You brought us the evidence we need to finally bring Crane down. That is not trouble. That is a gift." Wade's hand moved in slow circles on her back, soothing. "Try to sleep. I will be right here." Faith wanted to tell him he did not have to stay, but the words would not come because they would be a lie. She wanted him to stay. She needed him to stay. So she simply nodded and lay back down, and Wade resumed his seat in the chair he had pulled close to the bed. She fell asleep watching him, feeling safer than she had any right to feel. Morning brought clarity and planning. Walter Ryland gathered his sons and Faith around the kitchen table, along with his foreman, a grizzled man named Carson who had been with the family for 20 years. Faith repeated everything she had seen and heard, and Walter took notes in a careful hand. "The problem is proof," Walter said when she finished. "Your testimony is valuable, but Crane will have lawyers who will tear you apart in court. We need those forged deeds." "They were in his office at the bank," Faith said. "At least, that is where I assume he keeps them. He would not leave them at the saloon." "The bank is locked up tighter than a drum at night," Carson observed. "Crane has guards and he has the law in his pocket. Sheriff Dawson will not help us." "Then we need to get Crane to bring the deeds out into the open," Wade said. He had been quiet until now, leaning against the wall with his arms crossed. "Set a trap." "What kind of trap?" Walter asked. Wade looked at Faith, and she saw the wheels turning behind his eyes. "Crane thinks Faith is dead or will be soon. What if we let him think he was right? What if we make him confident enough to complete his plan?" Faith understood immediately. "You want to use me as bait." "Not directly. I want to let him think the threat is gone." "Then we spread word that the railroad representatives are arriving early. Crane will have to move fast to complete his forgeries and file the false deeds. When he does, we catch him in the act." It was risky, but Faith could see the logic. Walter frowned, clearly not liking the danger to his son, but finally nodded. "It could work, but we need help, people we can trust." "The families he is targeting," Faith suggested. "The McCartys and the Swensons and the others. If we warn them, they can help watch for Crane's move." Over the next week, Walter and his sons quietly reached out to the families whose land was at risk. Most believed them immediately, having already noticed strange men surveying their properties or had received pressure to sell. A few took more convincing, but Faith's detailed account and the Rylands' reputation eventually won them over. They formed a network of watchers, keeping eyes on the land office, the bank, and Crane's known associates. During this time, Faith stayed at the Double R, helping with the household work that had long been neglected by the family of men. She cooked and cleaned, mended clothes, and organized the chaos of the kitchen, and found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life more easily than she had expected. The work was hard but satisfying in a way her job at the saloon had never been. And there was Wade. He was often out working the ranch, but when he returned in the evenings he sought her out, and they would talk for hours on the porch as the sun set. He told her about growing up on the ranch, about his dreams of expanding their operation, and maybe one day raising horses as well as cattle. She told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her father's stories and her mother's garden, about the pain of losing everything and starting over. "You are strong," Wade said one evening as they sat watching the stars emerge. "Stronger than you know. Not many people could have survived what you went through." I did not feel strong. I felt terrified. Being strong does not mean not feeling fear. It means doing what needs to be done despite the fear. Wade turned to look at her, and in the dim light his eyes were intense. "You ran for 3 days through the desert. You kept going when most people would have given up. You trusted me when you had no reason to trust anyone. That is strength." Faith felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the warm evening. "You saved my life. I will never be able to repay that. I do not want repayment." Wade's voice had gone soft, intimate. "Faith, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound, and she was not sure if it was fear or hope that made her pulse race. "What?" "I have been trying to figure out how to say this without scaring you off." Wade rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly looking uncertain in a way she had never seen from him. "I know we have not known each other long. I know you have been through hell and probably are not thinking about anything except staying alive, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel." "Wade," Faith whispered, not sure how to finish the sentence. "I am falling in love with you." The words came out in a rush, honest and raw. "I think I started falling the moment I saw you hiding in that alcove, so fierce and frightened and determined to survive. This past week, getting to know you, seeing your kindness and your strength and the way you laugh at Willis's terrible jokes, it has only made it stronger. I know I have no right to say this now, but I cannot keep it inside anymore." Faith could not breathe. No one had ever spoken to her like this, with such naked honesty and emotion. The men she had known in her life had been rough, crude, or dishonest. Wade was different. He was good and true, and the idea that he could love her seemed impossible. "I am nobody," she said, the words tumbling out. "I am a saloon girl with no family and no prospects. Your father will never approve." "My father already approves. He told me yesterday that you have brought life back to this house." Wade reached out and took her hand, his touch sending warmth up her arm. "And you are not nobody. You are Faith Owens, the bravest woman I have ever met. If you do not feel the same way, I will understand, but I had to tell you. I had to let you know that when this is over, when Crane is dealt with and you are safe, I want you to stay. I want you to build a life here with me." Tears blurred Faith's vision. She had been alone for so long, fighting to survive day by day, never daring to dream of something more. And here was this man, this good and honest man, offering her everything she had never let herself want. "I am scared," she whispered. "I am scared to believe this is real. I know. I am scared too." Wade lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "But sometimes the best things in life are the ones that scare us most." Faith made her decision. She leaned forward and kissed him, soft and tentative at first, then deeper as Wade's arms came around her and pulled her close. It was her first real kiss, The first time she had let herself be vulnerable with a man, and it was everything she had never known she wanted. Wade kissed her like she was precious, like she mattered, and Faith felt something long frozen inside her begin to thaw when they finally broke apart, both breathless. Wade rested his forehead against hers. "So, is that a yes to staying?" "Yes," Faith said, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. "Yes, I will stay." The next days were both beautiful and tense. Faith and Wade's relationship shifted into something new and wonderful, stolen moments of kisses and quiet conversations, hands held under the table during meals. Walter and his other sons noticed but said nothing, though Faith caught Willis grinning at them more than once. But beneath the happiness was the constant awareness that Crane was still out there, still a threat. Their network of watchers reported increased activity around the land office. Crane had been seen meeting with his lawyer repeatedly. Something was building. The break came on a Tuesday morning. Carson rode in hard from town with news that a telegram had been sent to Crane claiming the railroad representatives would arrive in 3 days instead of 3 weeks. The bait had been taken. "He will have to file the deeds tomorrow or the next day," Walter said grimly. "Once the railroad men arrive, he will want everything looking legitimate." "So we watch the land office," Wade said, "and when he files, we catch him." They made their plans carefully. The targeted families would be stationed around the land office, ready to confront Crane the moment he tried to file the false deeds. Walter had convinced a judge from the next county over, a man he had served with in the war and who owed him a favor, to come to Fort Davis. If they could catch Crane in the act with witnesses, the judge could issue an immediate arrest warrant that even Sheriff Dawson could not ignore. Faith insisted on being there despite Wade's protests. "He is doing this because of what I saw. I need to be there when he goes down." The next afternoon found them scattered around the land office in various disguises. Faith wore a bonnet that shadowed her face and a simple dress borrowed from Mrs. McCarthy, looking like any other ranch wife in town for supplies. Wade stayed close but not obviously so, dressed as a drifter looking for work. Walter and the other ranchers positioned themselves strategically, armed and ready. They waited. The sun beat down mercilessly, and sweat trickled down Faith's back under the heavy dress. Twice she thought she saw Crane's distinctive figure approaching, only to be disappointed. The afternoon dragged on, and Faith began to fear they had guessed wrong. Then, as the sun angled toward evening, a carriage pulled up to the land office. Silas Crane emerged, carrying a leather document case, followed by his lawyer and 3 hard-looking men Faith recognized as his enforcers. Her breath caught in her throat. "That is him," she whispered to Wade, who had drifted close. "I see him. Hold position." Wade's hand brushed hers briefly, a touch of reassurance, then he moved away to signal the others. Crane entered the land office with his entourage. Walter had arranged for the clerk to be someone friendly to their cause, a young man who would stall and give them time. 5 minutes passed. 10. Faith's nerves were stretched tight, every muscle tense. Then Wade gave the signal. The ranchers converged on the land office from all sides, moving with coordinated precision. Faith followed, her heart in her throat as they pushed through the door. Crane looked up from the counter where he had been laying out deeds, his florid face registering shock and then rage when he saw the crowd. "What is the meaning of this? This is private business." "Private fraud, you mean," Walter said coldly. "Those are forged deeds, Crane, we all know it." "You have no proof of anything. I am conducting legitimate business." But Crane's eyes darted nervously, looking for an escape route. His enforcers moved to flank him protectively. "We have plenty of proof." Faith stepped forward, pushing back her bonnet so Crane could see her face clearly. The blood drained from his features as recognition hit. "Hello, Mr. Crane. Surprised to see me alive, you," Crane hissed. "You should be dead. The boys swore they saw you go down in the desert." Well, they were wrong. Faith moved closer, emboldened by Wade's presence at her back. "I heard everything that night. I saw your maps, heard your plans, and I am going to testify to all of it." Crane's composure shattered. He lunged for Faith with a snarl of rage, but Wade was faster. He intercepted Crane with a hard right cross that sent the bank manager sprawling. The enforcers reached for their guns, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Carson and the other ranchers had weapons trained on them, and after a tense moment, they slowly raised their hands. The judge, who had been waiting outside, entered with Sheriff Dawson in reluctant tow. He examined the deeds spread on the counter with a critical eye, comparing them to legitimate documents the ranchers had brought. His face grew darker with each page. "These are forgeries," he pronounced. "Crude ones at that. Silas Crane, I am issuing a warrant for your arrest on charges of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Sheriff, do your duty." Dawson, seeing which way the wind was blowing, moved to clap irons on Crane and his men. Crane's rage had turned to desperate pleading, but no one was listening. It was over. Faith felt Wade's arm come around her shoulders and she leaned into him, suddenly weak with relief. They had done it. Crane was finished, his plot exposed. She was safe. The aftermath took weeks to fully resolve. Crane's trial was swift, the evidence overwhelming. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison. His assets seized to compensate his victims. His lawyer and enforcers received lesser sentences, but were removed from Fort Davis permanently. The families who had been targeted kept their land, and the railroad representatives, when they did arrive, negotiated honestly for right-of-way easements that benefited everyone. Through it all, Faith stayed at the Double R, and her place there became more permanent with each passing day. She was no longer a guest but family, accepted fully by Walter and his younger sons. The ranch house under her care became warm and welcoming in ways it had not been since their mother died. As summer turned to fall, Wade rode out one evening to a spot he had told Faith about. A high ridge overlooking their land where the sunset painted the whole world gold. He helped her down from her horse and pulled a small box from his pocket. "I know we have not known each other long," he said, echoing his words from months before. "But I know my heart, and I know I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Faith Owens, will you marry me?" Faith looked at the simple gold ring in the box, then up at Wade's face where hope and love shone clear in his eyes. This man had saved her life, protected her, and shown her what it meant to be cherished. He had given her a home and a family when she had nothing. More than that, he had given her a future. "Yes," she said, and watched joy transform his face. "Yes, Wade Ryland, I will marry you." They were wed in Fort Davis 2 months later in a ceremony that brought together all the families who had stood with them against Crane. Faith wore a dress of cream silk that Walter had ordered special from San Antonio, and flowers from the gardens the ranch wives had helped her plant that spring. Wade wore his best suit and could not stop staring at his bride like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The reception was held at the Double R, with tables laden with food and a fiddle player providing music for dancing. Faith danced with her new husband, then with each of her brothers-in-law, and finally with Walter, who told her quietly that she had brought his son happiness he had feared Wade would never find. As the stars came out and the party continued around them, Wade led Faith away to the porch where they had first confessed their feelings. "Happy?" he asked, pulling her into his arms. "Happier than I ever thought I could be," Faith answered honestly. She had come so far from that terrified woman hiding in the canyon. She had found strength she never knew she possessed, and love she had never dared to dream of. "Thank you for finding me that day. Thank you for trusting me," Wade said, and kissed her under the vast Texas sky. The years that followed were good ones. The ranch prospered under the combined efforts of the Ryland men and Faith's careful management of the household accounts. They expanded their operations, adding the horse breeding program Wade had dreamed of. Faith proved to have a natural talent with the animals, gentling even the most skittish colts with patience and kindness. Their first child, a son they named William, was born in the spring of 1880, delivered by the same ranch wife who had loaned Faith her wedding dress. Wade was beside himself with joy, cradling the tiny baby with a tenderness that made Faith fall in love with him all over again. Walter doted on his first grandchild shamelessly, and Willis and Wayne competed to be the favorite uncle. 2 years later came a daughter they named Flora, with her mother's blonde hair and her father's blue-gray eyes. She was followed by another son, Francis, who had barely learned to walk before he was toddling after his older brother and trying to climb everything in sight. Life was not without its challenges. There were hard winters and dry summers, sick cattle and injured horses, the constant work that ranch life demanded. But Faith and Wade faced it all together, their love deepening with each year that passed. They built a life of purpose and meaning, raising their children with the values of honesty and hard work, kindness and courage. On their 10th anniversary, Wade took Faith back to the canyon where he had found her. They rode together on the same sorrel horse, now gray-muzzled but still strong, and found the alcove where she had hidden. The water still pooled in its stone basin, clear and sweet. "You ever regret it?" Wade asked as they stood looking at the place where their story had begun. "Do you ever wish you had taken a different path?" Faith thought about the frightened girl she had been, alone and desperate, with no future she could imagine beyond survival. She thought about the woman she had become, strong and loved, with a family and a home and a purpose. She thought about the 3 beautiful children waiting for them back at the ranch, and the man beside her who had shown her what it meant to be truly cherished. "Not for a single moment," she said, and took his hand. "You saved my life that day, Wade. But more than that, you gave me a reason to live it. You gave me everything." Wade pulled her close, holding her the way he had that first night when she had woken screaming from nightmares. But there were no more nightmares now, only dreams, only love. Only the certain knowledge that whatever challenges life brought, they would face them together. "I love you, Faith Ryland," he said, the words as true and honest as the first time he had spoken them. "I love you too," Faith answered, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They rode back to the Double R as the sun set, painting the Texas landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Behind them, the canyon held its secrets and its memories. Ahead of them, their children were waiting with Walter to welcome them home. And around them, the vast and beautiful land stretched endlessly, full of promise and possibility. Faith had come west looking for a new start and had found so much more. She had found her strength, her voice, and her purpose. She had found justice and vindication. Most importantly, she had found love in its truest and most enduring form. The cowboy who had discovered her hiding in the canyon had become her husband, her partner, and her greatest blessing. Their story had begun with fear and flight, with danger and darkness. But it had transformed into something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the kind of love that changes everything. In the end, Faith had not just survived. She had thrived, building a life richer and fuller than anything she could have imagined in those desperate days, when she had run for her life through the unforgiving desert. And every night, As she lay beside Wade in their bed with the sounds of the ranch settling around them and their children sleeping safely down the hall, Faith gave thanks for the twist of fate that had brought him to that canyon at exactly the right moment. Some might call it luck or coincidence. Faith knew better. It was destiny, pure and simple, two souls meant to find each other against all odds. The years continued to unfold with the gentle rhythm of ranch life. William grew tall and strong like his father, learning to work cattle with skill and dedication. Flora developed a gift for music, her sweet voice filling the ranch house with songs. Francis proved to be the most studious of the three, always asking questions and reading every book he could get his hands on. As their children grew, Faith and Wade made sure they knew the story of how their parents had met. Not to frighten them, but to teach them important lessons about courage, integrity, and standing up for what is right even when it is dangerous. The children listened wide-eyed to tales of their mother's flight through the desert and their father's rescue, and they grew up with a deep sense of justice and compassion instilled from these early lessons. The Double R continued to thrive and expand. Wade's horse breeding program became renowned throughout Texas, with buyers coming from as far as New Orleans and St. Louis to purchase their stock. Faith's careful management ensured they weathered economic downturns that devastated other ranches. Together, they became pillars of the Fort Davis community, respected and admired for their fairness and generosity. Walter lived to see all three of his grandchildren grow into young adults, passing peacefully in his sleep at the age of 72 with his family around him. His death was mourned throughout the county, and his funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched. Before he died, he told Faith that she had been the daughter he never had, and that she had given his son the happiness he had always wanted for him. Those words became one of Faith's most treasured memories. Willis and Wayne both married eventually, bringing their own wives to the ranch and adding more children to the growing Ryland clan. The ranch that had once housed only men became filled with the laughter and energy of women and children, transforming into something even more vibrant and alive. Family gatherings were loud, chaotic, and full of love, exactly as they should be. Through all the years and changes, Faith and Wade's love remained the foundation upon which everything else was built. They still took evening rides together when work allowed, still sat on the porch watching sunsets and talking about everything and nothing. The passion of their early days had matured into something even deeper, a partnership and friendship that transcended romance. They had disagreements, of course. Faith's stubbornness occasionally clashed with Wade's determination, and there were times they had to work through hurt feelings or misunderstandings. But they had learned early to communicate honestly, to never let anger fester, and to always remember why they had fallen in love in the first place. These principles carried them through every rough patch and made their bond unbreakable. When Faith turned 40, Wade threw her a surprise party that brought together friends and family from across Texas. As she looked around at the faces of people she loved, people who loved her in return, Faith was overcome with gratitude for the extraordinary life she had been blessed to live. The frightened girl who had hidden in a canyon seemed like someone from another lifetime, and in many ways she was. That girl had died in the desert, and in her place had emerged a woman who knew her own strength and worth. In the quiet moment before the festivities began, Wade found her alone and took her hands in his. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, reading her mood the way he had learned to do over 20 years of marriage. "How far we have come," Faith said softly. "How different everything is from what I ever imagined my life could be. Do you miss anything about the life before me, before the ranch?" It was an honest question asked without jealousy or insecurity. Wade simply wanted to understand his wife's heart. Faith considered carefully before answering. I miss my parents sometimes. I wish they could have seen this, seen who I became and the family I created. But as for the rest, no. That life was about surviving. This life is about living, really living. You taught me the difference. Wade smiled and kissed her forehead. We taught each other. I was so focused on the ranch, on work and responsibility, that I had forgotten how to see the beauty in things. You reminded me. You brought color back into my world. They stood together in comfortable silence, hands clasped, hearts aligned. Outside, their children were setting up tables and hanging decorations. Soon the party would begin, and there would be music and food and celebration. But for this moment, it was just the two of them, remembering and appreciating the journey that had brought them here. The party was a tremendous success, lasting well into the night with dancing and stories and laughter that echoed across the ranch. Faith danced with each of her children, now grown and starting their own adult lives. She danced with her brothers-in-law and nephews and friends. But the last dance of the night belonged to Wade, as it always had and always would. As they swayed together under lantern light, Wade whispered in her ear, "Here is to 40 more years together." Faith laughed softly. "We will be ancient by then." "I do not care. I will love you just as much when we are old and gray as I do right now. More even, because we will have all those years and memories between us." "Then yes," Faith said, echoing her answer to his proposal so many years before. "Yes to 40 more years. Yes to whatever time we are given. Yes to spending every moment of it with you." They kissed as their family and friends cheered around them, and Faith knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The path that had led her here had been dark and frightening at times, full of danger and uncertainty. But it had also been necessary, bringing her to this moment, this place, these people who filled her life with meaning and joy. The years continued their steady march forward. William married a smart, capable woman named Sarah and took over much of the daily management of the ranch. Flora married a teacher from Fort Davis and moved to town, though she visited the ranch frequently with her growing brood of children. Francis went off to college in Austin, the first Ryland to pursue higher education, and returned with a law degree and a passion for ensuring justice for those who could not fight for themselves. Wade often said that Francis had inherited his mother's sense of justice, that fire that had driven Faith to risk everything rather than stay silent about Crane's corruption. Francis took it as the compliment it was meant to be, and his law practice focused on helping small ranchers and farmers fight against the kind of predatory schemes that had once nearly destroyed his own family. As Faith and Wade entered their 50s, they began to step back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, trusting the next generation to carry it forward. They took trips together, visiting places they had always talked about seeing. They traveled to San Antonio and Houston, to New Orleans and Kansas City. But they always came home to the Double R, to the land they had built their life upon. On their 30th anniversary, Wade took Faith back to the canyon one more time. They were older now, their movements slower, but the love between them burned as bright as ever. They sat by the water where he had first offered her his canteen, where he had first extended trust and protection to a terrified stranger. "You remember what I said to you that day?" Wade asked. "The very first thing I said," Faith smiled, the memory as clear as if it had happened yesterday. "You said, 'You can come out. I am not going to hurt you.' And I never did I? Never once in all these years." "Never once," Faith agreed. "You kept that promise every single day. You have been my protector, my partner, my greatest love." Wade took both her hands in his weathered fingers strong and sure. You saved me too, you know. I did not realize how lonely I was until you came into my life. How empty this ranch felt, how purposeless my days were beyond work. You filled all those empty spaces with light and warmth. You made everything matter. They sat together as the sun set one more time over the canyon, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something extraordinary together. Their story had become legend in Fort Davis, the tale of the cowboy who rescued a woman hiding in the canyon and fell in love with her. People still told it years later, though the details got embellished and changed in the retelling. But Faith and Wade knew the truth of it. They knew it had not been a simple rescue or a storybook romance. It had been hard and scary and uncertain. It had required courage from both of them, a willingness to be vulnerable and take risks. It had demanded patience and forgiveness and constant effort to build something lasting. Yet despite all the challenges, or perhaps because of them, what they had created together was real and true and absolutely worth every struggle. Their love was not the stuff of fairy tales. It was better than that. It was human and flawed and beautiful, tested by time and tribulation, and emerging stronger for it. As they rode back to the ranch for the last time, the sun painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and crimson, Faith leaned back against Wade's chest, the way she had that very first ride 30 years ago. His arms came around her, holding her secure, and she felt the same sense of safety and rightness she had felt then. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what? For finding me. For believing in me, for loving me, for giving me this life." Wade pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you for trusting me, for staying, for building this with me. I love you, Faith. Always have, always will." "Always," Faith echoed and meant it with her whole heart. They reached the ranch as darkness fell and lights blazed from every window. Their children and grandchildren had gathered to celebrate their anniversary. The house full of family and love, and the continuation of the legacy Faith and Wade had begun all those years ago in a canyon where a terrified woman had hidden and a good man had found her. Their story had begun in fear, but had transformed into something beautiful and lasting. It was a story of courage and justice, of trust and redemption, of two people who had saved each other in ways that went far beyond physical rescue. It was a love story, pure and true, the kind that endures through decades and hardships and the ordinary challenges of building a life together. And on that 30th anniversary night, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built, Faith and Wade Ryland celebrated not just their marriage but everything it represented. They had taken fear and transformed it into courage. They had taken loneliness and transformed it into love. They had taken a chance encounter in a canyon and transformed it into a legacy that would endure for generations. It was, in every way that mattered, a life well lived and a love well earned. And as they stood together greeting their guests, hands clasped as they had been for 30 years, Faith knew that if she could go back and change anything about her journey, she would not. Every hardship, every moment of terror, every desperate choice had led her exactly where she needed to be. Home with Wade, forever.